topic. We are talking to AxessImpact, Yves Carnazzoli and Michele Paterno, who are going to talk about additionality and the 3M process. I'm already quite curious, and so I will just briefly introduce our guests so that they can enlighten us with what the 3M process actually is about and how to implement it into their current projects. Our first guest, Yves Carnazzoli, is a social entrepreneur and global macro strategist with more than 20 years of experience acquired in Switzerland and abroad, and he's covering both the private and the institutional clients. Striving to combine analytical skills, system thinking, and driving impact investing, asset allocation, and portfolio constructing, he's orchestrating various projects on end-to-end visibility of investment process. His partner, Michele Paterno, and co-founder of AxessImpact, as well as director of Axos SA, is a young entrepreneur who is a project developer and passionate about sustainability and nature. He has 7 years of experience in corporate bonds, and as a member of the committee of a Swiss independent asset manager, he's an activist of sustainable finance and green economy. So it's a match between the two of them. Very welcome. So thank you for being with us today, and I will leave the floor now to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. I will share my screen first. Okay, I think it's fine. You can see the screen because I don't have the written on my side.
Yes, we can. We can see the screen perfectly and hear you.
Okay, so first, thank you and hello everybody, and thank you SmartBay for organizing this event. I think it's a very important one. And the first introduction of the KAMAI was quite intense, a lot of information. This one will not be much easier, but I think it was important to discuss it. So I will. Well, first it's ourselves. I think it's done. I will introduce rapidly AxessImpact. AxessImpact is a new company, but it has been created as a collective action, and so the mission was to go to the market with people with the diversified domain expertise. So it's the construction of AxessImpact was already created as a pool of different knowledge and expertise. And it will be also the same type of solutions that we will create for the ecosystem that we on the platform we create. So we are based on the 3M process that we will explain more deeply today. So measurement, monitoring, and monetizing. And also we will also discuss why we move from additionality to the value chain of impact. So the agenda, I will explain the first part, the what, the why, and the how. It will be more theory and the vision and the strategy. And then Michele will go more deeply in the more technical and the more use case linked to the carbon market. So I will start by what normally we finish. I will do the takeaway at the beginning and takeaway at the end. It will be the same. But maybe we will see if I was clear in my explanation, and then that you already know what I tried to achieve in these 15 minutes. The first mission that we will try to understand is why climate change and biodiversity loss are wicked problem, and why we need collective action. So I will not explain the two multi-stakeholder system thinking, but just the title. The second thing we want to resolve is the financing gap and the trust, and I think it's important that I've been mentioned that we need trust and traceability and transparency, and why we need that. The third part we try to also explain is why we need a value chain of impact and a dynamic model to understand the value chain of impact. The last one is the scalability. This project has been created because there is an urgency to have a lot of scalability, so we will also explain it. So, why we need this trust and transparency? Because it's a wicked problem. And wicked problem is something, there will be a small film because I think it's a very important concept. But what we can explain, everybody knows the urgency, and that there is these planetary boundaries, and the two big planetary boundaries that have been already crossed is the biodiversity loss and climate change, and they are interconnected. And where we focus is to bring an end-to-end process linked to the nature-based solution. So we are in this vicious cycle. So the vicious cycle is the climate change exacerbating the biodiversity loss with the impact on human prosperity. And this cycle is creating this negative spillover. What we want to create is a virtuous cycle. Of course, there is what we call this tragedy of common and tragedy of horizon, and we will also explain what does that mean. So when we try to understand what was the financing gap, what was the issue between these wicked problems, there was a huge discrepancy on the solution, huge discrepancy on the estimation, and all this kind of understanding the cone of uncertainty and the knowledge gap is linked because it's a wicked problem. Because if it was a problem that have very simple and the possibility to resolve, there was no issue to create all this pool of trust and expertise. It was something that people were already able to resolve. And there is two main dimensions that exacerbate that. It's what we call the tragedy of common and the tragedy of horizon. The tragedy of common is that we are able to act in very linear way about what we are doing and the repercussion we can have. When there is a causal link that is far away, and of course, the common goods are something that we can not see directly the bad externalities that we bring when we are consuming or what we are acting. So in a sense, we say we don't have a true visibility and true action about what we can do. So it's a tragedy of common. The tragedy of horizon is what we are doing now. For example, the climate change will have no impact before a long time. So in a sense, these two tragedies makes that there is a discrepancy between what people want to do in their mind, what they think, and as of today, when they act. It's also part of the greenwashing world because these two tragedies, there is a lot of bridge to solve. And one key bridge to solve is to understand the system in its complexity, in the value chain of impact, something done in the Tanzania as a repercussion up to us. So it's not easy for people, for all people. You don't mean that you or me, for everybody, to understand what does that mean. So it's a film of 3 minutes. It's maybe a little long versus the time, but I think it will make a little sense for what I will explain after. So let's see this one. Okay, so I think it was an important part about understanding why also we need to have this kind of partnership with SmartMay, and where we try to resolve with our own ecosystem of platform. So in essence, what we want to need is the collective action, as was mentioned in the film, to avoid this resignation polarization. So we also need to see the need as a system as a whole, and again, what we will develop in our solution is this private-public partnership, this multi-stakeholder solution, this pool of knowledge and expertise, this cooperation in space, time, and multiple solutions. And of course, what we need when we move from a centralized solution to a disintermediate solution up to some more decentralization, we need trust, transparency, and traceability. And we need that in a dynamic way that all the stakeholders can understand the full picture. And that was a very important part of why we started this collaboration with SmartBay, because their own infrastructure I mentioned before allows this kind of trust. It's also important to avoid this silo mentality organization myopathy, but I think it's important. So what we created is this 3M process. So this 3M process, it's a layer above the infrastructure that was mentioned before, and it's based on 3 types of solutions. So it's interconnected, it's a kind of nested model, but decentralized. So it's measurement, monitoring, and monetization. So, and it's important that we have the ability for the scalability to have this model in the temporal way. For example, from the GHS emission to the compensation to the reduction, it should be embedded in the same trust and transparency. It should not be in silo. So in terms of temporal, in terms of spatial, we can have the scalability to move what we define as a multi-protocol in one part, keeping the generic part to more specific part in another part, in another type of solution. We have project in Tanzania, project in Morocco. There is many ongoing projects in different parts. We need this scalability. And of course, we are a nature-based solution, but I think we need also a multi-solution. I think this kind of wicked problem need to have a different angles from moving from circular economy, renewable energy, regenerative. There is many dimensions that it could be integrated in the same approach. One also important part, I will just check the time, and I have to accelerate a little. It's important also to define what is the true outcome and where we move from the value chain of impact. I think the impact could be positive or negative. It could be intended or unintended. What we want to achieve is intended positive, long-term, and evidence-based impact investing. And we have also the ex ante and the ex post, which is a very important part of the model. So I will accelerate. So this one is where we move from this two layer about where you use the trust and the traceability of the SmartBee to move on different protocol. How we move in the multi-protocol solution, where we can have the digital entities, the data access management, and creating this pool of knowledge. So it's a multi-stakeholder. We bring trust to the investor, private, public, ex ante, ex post, and we will see that. The temporal traceability to avoid the double spending and the double claiming. Transparency to measure and monitor the value chain of impact on all the co-benefiting during the journey. Governance and revenue sharing to bring resilience to the community and the stakeholder. And scalability, as we mentioned, in multi-protocol, spatial, and multi-solution. So just one simple example, there is a partner validator from satellite data. He will have a key. We will be an allocator of this key. So we are like we give key to the different stakeholders that can bring the validation process inside the blockchain. There will be some photo of a forest. There will be validation, and from that we create. And it's important. It's not being through the native cryptocurrency, and as it was mentioned by Zokama, it's a very low energy project. And of course, we have to fulfill the data trust of the data on the different blockchain. So just one word, but I think it's an important subject by itself. But one part of this project was to bridge the financing gap, and there is a huge financing gap. And in nature-based solution, the private sector is far behind. So what we needed is to integrate the private investor in the process. So we have ex-ante investor and ex-post investor, and I think it's important that all information will be available from dashboard, and the ex-ante investor will take part to the project as a stakeholder, and he will receive the information in his dashboard as an ex-ante investor. He will receive also all the dynamic information and the mapping, also co-benefits that we can find in the forest in a project. And then we have the certification, and at the end there will be the fungible asset, and it could be an emitter or impact investor that can continue the journey. So I think I will go through. So again, I will just move again. I think the four key takeaway. I think normal. I will hand over the micro to Michele, that will move now to the more concrete part of to specific what I mentioned for a specific use case. And because the time is very constrained, and I will let him some time. So thank you, and of course I will be happy for the question just after.
Thank you very much, Eva. I'll share my screen with the second part of the presentation now. Thank you for the introduction. I'll try to be as short as possible. We take in practice for the second part of the presentation the case of the carbon market and apply that one to the structure that Eva just described to us. So we identify different problems within the carbon market space. And to these problems, we found what we believe are the solutions. As we were saying, there is a need for a collective action, so decentralizing the protocol itself. It's one of the options. This is going to be also allowing us to have a better and stronger governance, being able to, for example, loop into the valorization of the lands the same people that are actually locally installed. So local NGO and the whole actors that are that should benefit from the valorization of, for example, if we take the example of the carbon market, a project of saving of forestry lands. Other examples could be, for example, having better measurement. Better measurement can be achieved by using new technologies, and these technologies has to be embedded into the validation process of the protocol itself. So all this solution can be actually looped in what is this sort of like virtuous cycle that we need to create, as Yves already explained us before. So having this sort of like boost that allows us to not only valorize lands and protect them, but also loop into the valorization the people that are needed, that need the valorization of the lands they are living on. And at the same time, giving investors the transparency and traceability, and especially the trust, to be able not only to follow the process, but also to be part of the decisional aspect of the process itself by being looped into the validation process of the protocol itself. So if we want to take an example and going back to the 3M of AxessImpact, so starting from the measuring, we can imagine the definition of an initial situation and the desired outcome. The desired outcome that we want to reach is an impact that has to be traceable, transparent, and having a huge trust. So we start from defining an impact protocol. This impact protocol is defining what are our locks that needs to be open. And AxessImpact position himself as an architect of this protocol, which is going to allocate the keys of validation in order to reach the desired impact and the desired impact. So this proof of impact, by being structurally decentralized, allows us to loop into the process the real experts and giving responsibility to the people that actually are able to define a certain task. So we can reach by that having a sort of evolution through each proof of impact to reach the certificate. And the certificate can be then be traded, and all that monitored to the whole process thanks to, for example, the blockchain registry that SmartBee just presented. So by having this, by structurally embedded into the solution of AxessImpact, we're able to give full transparency and responsibility to the right parties of the certifications. One of the examples of the key validation could become also from the technology itself. For example, what we are developing within our project in Tanzania is a remote sensing analysis, which allows us to validate and monitor, on one side, validate our baseline and monitor the evolution of our baseline, such as a deforestation rate, for example, or such as the actual status of our project. And by then, through the monitoring, we can actually pilot the decision of the investors or the decision of the value chain of validation himself in order to define, for example, how to reinject the valorization of the certificate into the project in order to create an impact. All of that keeping in mind a trust and transparency aspect, which gives us the possibility to give full accessibility both to investors and to the same players of the protocol himself. The example we see here is dedicated, for example, to a piece of forest. When we can map it, see, for example, how is the vegetation status of our forest, and then address, for example, a problem of lack of trees or disease within our plants in order to boost the carbon absorption capacity of our lands and create additionality. This is one of the examples that we are actually developing. And from the monitoring, we can pass to the last aspect, which is the monetization. Monetization, which is quite important because by actually having a full transparency and visibility on what is going to be the protocol, we can actually assess ex ante what is going to be the amount of certifications that we can produce. All of that once the baseline and the eligibility of a project is being defined. So by having a certain level of visibility on how much impact we can generate, we can actually starting to providing financing to the project in an ex ante, meaning like being able to financing the project to then get to the point where we have the capability of ensuring the permanence of the project until his certifications, and being able to generate a value ex post under the form of a certificate. So by offering these two options, not only we're able to finance the projects until they certificate, but we're also able to give to the investor ex ante a level of full transparency and traceability within the evolution of the protocol itself, and also by having the protocol loaded into a solution such as an eco blockchain, we are able to give away keys in a decentralized way, meaning that we can position ourselves only as an architect of protocol rather than being a black box defining the certification itself. So we have this capacity of both giving transparency to the investor and actually enable the local population or the local NGOs to take part as stakeholder of the project into the evolution and the validation of the protocol, and at the same time looping them in the repartition of the value generated by the cell of the protocol himself. So by doing so, we are actually able to close the circle of the 3M and going back to what is this virtuous rather than vicious cycle. This has a huge advantage of being in the process of creating an economy which is based on an exchange of impact. So if we want to go back to the solution of AxessImpact, what we can imagine is that from an investor perspective, we will offer a technology which allows the investor not only to follow let's say the certificate himself, but to follow the path that reach the certifications. So to follow the evolution of the validation of the protocol until the certificate, and actually being able not only to monitor, but to be an active part of definition of how these investments are allocated on the project. All of that given the whole possibility of including within the validation, thanks to new technologies, for example, the validation through SIM card that SmartB just presented can allow us to load into the system proof of impact, such as the photos or pictures taken on every kind of mobile by the rangers on our lands in Tanzania, or for example, being able to hash the automatic picture taken from cameras over the land that proves the existence of biodiversity, and these pictures can be used as proof of impact to generate what is the protocol behind the biodiversity certification. So this kind of freedom allowed, this kind of openness to and decentralization allows us to give a much better transparency and trust to the projects. So in practice, if we stay to the example of the carbon we are bringing on a new standard, looping into the process new technologies such as remote sensing, clearly with a high level of data modeling, transparency and trust thanks to our eco-blockchain, a bottom-up governance integration, which allows us actually, as I was saying before, to loop in the process local population, both in the valorization and in the validation of the protocols, monitoring and visualization, both for the project owner and for the investor, and the marketplace, which could allow investor to both trade what we call the options ex ante on the protocols, or certificate ex post, which are the results of the validation of the protocol itself. All of that clearly can be applied as on the example I just mentioned to the carbon market, or to any kind of different impacts. If we want another example, we're now running a project on coating of boats. This new coating is able to prove a less consumption of energy, a less consumption of gas by the boats which are moving. So by giving the full transparency, we are able to track what is the additionality generated by this new painting over in the environment, in an environment where we know perfectly that shipping is quite big.
And I think we lost Michele.
A real
Let's
impact
see if he comes back.
development, traceability, and transactions, and proof of measures of sustainability impact. That is how AxessImpact is tackling this wicked problem, starting from nature-based solution and moving on to the whole impact and also measuring of SDGs. I try to be as fast as possible, seeing the time constraint. I think we could open potentially to question.
You did a great job, Michele. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, now the connection seems to be a little bit disrupted. Thank you. This all sounds very, very promising. And I indeed have a couple of questions for you. What are the main challenges you're facing regarding the acceptance of such an innovation or innovative solution?
So I will start maybe from one part of the issue is I think when we move to this new way of integrating the distributive knowledge and the validation by stakeholder project by project, I think this kind of disintermediation need to be also validated by the end user, the emitter, because of course when we will be when all the key will be allocated and validated in the time period, then there will be some audit, and we are agnostic to the standard. We can embed every type of standard, which is the golden standard or Vera. But in a sense, it's still the validation process will be done by the stakeholder by themselves, and its kind of integration will be important. I think the other is also the revenue sharing model. The revenue sharing model, because it's a new way also, because it's a dynamic integrating the community and the local actor up to the investor. So we need a governance on the local actor, and also probably how we use new technology like the eco-blockchain. There is still some knowledge gap and understanding of the knowledge gap. I think there is this three main issue, but maybe Michele have other part on the technology or the thinking.
Yeah, I think that as Ivo was describing, one interesting aspect is as it's a quite complicated issue, and usually it's complicated both from the managing aspect, because maybe we are locally, we are in a country where government is not necessarily stable, or maybe because we are running with data which are not too easy to source. The only solution that we saw is by embedding this kind of decentralized system, we are enabling a sort of solution which is the result of a collective action, and it's only by applying a collective action that we can find a solution to what we call wicked problems, because we have to put ahead the impact and the results we want to reach in order, and that's the target that we need to have, and we can get there only together and not by single result.
Okay, very, very interesting. But are there any security concerns or governance issues you face in that process?
Okay, so I will start. Of course, one of the key will be linked to the technology and the framework, the infrastructure of Smart Bay by nature. I think we need to as we have a more disintermediated trust, and we are not by a very centralized way. We trust the data, and we trust the people. So we trust the data and the knowledge. So in a sense, what we need is to be sure that the oracles information inside the model is trustful. That's why, to avoid the conflict of interest, it's not AxessImpact that will be the validator. The validator will be the multi-stakeholder. And I think that on the investor side, I think it's important also that we will onboard asset manager as an ex-ante. An ex-ante, they will buy optionality on the project. So yes, we need a blended finance, and we need to tranche from different type of investor. At the beginning of the project, there is a lot of cone of uncertainty. On more we validate the solution during the time period, more there will be a reduction of this risk. But of course, the onboarding and to show the security of the project and the validation. And of course, when we deal with wicked problem and with forest, there is all the issue traditional, the permanence, what's needed. We also have to put the trust about the traditional way, and of course the regulation of the data by itself, and the security of the data management system and everything linked to the security, I think of what.
Okay, but it sounds like you're already providing the solution for that question. And I have another question, but it's quite similar. So is there a high risk for any false data or fraud in that regard?
Well, I will maybe just add one part of the other. I think one issue maybe I didn't mention that we give trust to the data and the validator, but what is still important is what type of insurance we bring to that, because of course when we decentralize, we need a kind of a validation of insurance that the system is working also, because what could be misleading is maybe the data is wrongly embedded in the system, the Oracle. But that, as a dynamic validation, we can probably see quite rapidly that there is some issue about the data of people, what the data they put. But if it's fraud, or if it's very smart malversation from the decentralized system, we need also to have a validation by the stakeholder and also by some insurance. So probably the key will also to have the trust around the fraud. But through the blockchain, we can, of course, guarantee the immutability. So one, it's truthful. When it comes as an oracle, there is maybe some issue.
There might be also another aspect to consider is that fraud and let's say wrong data is something that already exists and is something that we cannot escape. The only way that we can solve the problem is by looping into the process multiple people and having a multiple, let's say, a validation process, which is decentralized, and also by proving that the data that we're using are by having a system which can evolve in time, because it's the collective action of multiple sources. So even if we start from a data which has a certain level of uncertainty, and that's something that we face, for example, in the ex-ante financing, the investor which comes in has a risk, as a premium from a risk taking, because we are in the phase of we still have to validate the protocol, but we need to finance the project in order to ensure the permanence of the project itself. So a lot of projects on nature-based, especially nowadays, they don't get to the certificates simply because they need a long time to get validated. If we find a solution to actually finance this project ex ante, then we can not only validate the protocol, get to the end of the protocol by being able of financing it, but we can actually improve the protocol itself just to the point where all the key validators are so fragmented in small tasks, which are gonna automatically improve the quality of the protocol itself. I don't know if I explained it correctly, but it's, once again, it's only thanks to the collective action and the centralization which we're gonna bring the transparency and trust on the process itself.
Maybe I will just add one, because I think there is also the political risk and the regulatory issue about, of course, we are in different countries. And I think if the ability to integrate the government as a stakeholder in the system, in the revenue sharing, and not as the one that will take some part of the value creation at the end as a tax, but inside the system as a stakeholder, and with the true visibility of all stakeholders, local community, academy, scientific committee, data, in a sense, there will be also more resilience. I think what we can bring to this pool of stakeholders is resilience, because of course also we pay back even rapidly, because there is this ex ante, the community, and the community is acting in result-based evidence, and they are taking part of the system. They are not just paid for being there, and then there will be misbehavior. So I think it's important to have this kind of full transparency among the stakeholders.
Okay, that was very clear. Thank you. I think I have a last question here. Yes. What are the main challenges regarding the Additionality? How does your approach facilitate a public partnership to bridge the financing gap, and what role does your technology play here? That one is a very interesting one. I don't know who wants to
start and Michele follow. So I think we have a good model. I think the financing gap is amazing, and as we mentioned, we have some numbers that is just completely mad. But in a sense, I think when we want to tranche, and there is different type of investor. We have the philanthropy, we have the foundation, we have the investor who want to take some risk. We have some impact investors. We have a mapping of investors that is a very specificity and don't want to come at the same time in the project. Some are very risk taker, or maybe philanthropy. They want to start a project to give the minimum energy, and the other want to see better validation, so they will receive from the dashboard the validation of the cone of uncertainty and where we move forward in the project. And there is new investor or new actors that will join the process. And at the end, when we have at the beginning, it's a non-fungible asset in a sense, or non-fungible, and then it's a fungible, for example, a ton of CO2, and there is other people want to make the exit, for example, an emitter. And for that, we can tranche between private and public, and between risk taker from someone who are more risk, not lover, but at least we want to have some from pure impact investor to someone who want more putting more weight maybe from return and less on impact, so we can also move the risk return impact trade-off from my side.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you very much. Michele, you want to add anything?
I think it's quite Yves has been quite precise into his reply. One interesting aspect is that clearly we are in a system, if we want to take the example of the carbon regulation or maybe the mapping of SDG, where we feel there is still quite uncertainty on the regulatory changes and frameworks especially. We clearly believe that by giving transparency and full traceability, we will be anyway in a position that whichever regulation is going to come after, we'll be able to offer the best solution. As once again, it's an evolution of the protocol, and the protocol is going to be adapting itself to the offer and demand of the investor, and to adapting itself also to what are going to be the regulation need, by simply say we decentralize the thing to the best experts, and we give the full transparency at every level. And at the same time, we are actually valorizing what is the important thing, which is the end user or the end owner in the case of nature-based local communities. And by doing so, the only thing is that we can say is by staying as agnostic as possible on who's validating the protocol, but giving full transparency at every level of the process.
Very
Just,
interesting.
I think just a remark of Michele make me aware about something interesting about. I think there is a big debate about nested model from the World Bank, from local to global to jurisdictional. In a sense, giving this full transparency, we can adapt from very local project to something more global. And I think that's for some project, country, or maybe region. So it's what we said between the spatial, but also from the regulation of the Paris Agreement. I think there will be interesting debate about the different actors and corporate, emitter, country, host, country, and how we can, what Michele said, that we will give the full capacity of the data and the immutability of data that we can plug in to every big change on the regulatory side and move on that when there will be the voluntary regulatory convergence, because there will be some standardization and then we will be ready to make the bridge, the connection more quicker, and we'll have the baseline and the track record because we keep the data and the protocol in open source.
Yeah, it makes it very scalable. Yeah, you offer the solution to one of the most urgent requests, traceability and transparency foremostly. So this is something very, very interesting. Unfortunately, I will have to look at the time. Thank you both very, very much for your intervention and for answering all those questions. We also have a quick presentation now from Knut Giersch, an impact finance consultant. Knut, you are going to tell us more about an impact fund dedicated to the ecological transition funding that is only based on carbon credits. That sounds very interesting. Could you please tell us more about that?
Yes, sure, with pleasure. Can you hear me? I hope so.
We can hear you.
Perfect, perfect, very good. Can you see me as well? Can you see me as well?
Not very, very good. Also the connection, it seems like there is an echo now that you started speaking.
1 second.
Okay, let's wait for Knut to reconnect. Let's see if it works out. Okay, I can't see him anymore, so I can't see him anymore. Yves, Michele, do you want to add anything else to your presentation for now?
Just thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I really liked your comment on what we offer. The we that we offer is actually, once again, it's a collaborative aspect of the community. So really, like we should thank the whole protocol and the whole community for reaching such a solution, because it's just thanks to them that we can solve this problem.
Thank you, Michele. That was perfect. On point, what you just said. Thank you. Knut, so you're back. Let's try it again.
Yes, let's try it again. Just to give you some, regarding the question about the fraud. You know, I'm in the financial business since nearly 30 years, and fraud, you can have it on different levels. The thing which, from our perspective as an asset manager, in this case, which is very interesting, is that the technology basically will help us to allow to track the money we're going to. So this maybe will help to tackle some frauds, not all, but at least the maximum what we could achieve as in terms of risk assessment as well. So yes, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you very much for attending this e-meeting. Thank you as well to Additionality and SmartBay for allowing us to talk about a bit about this fund and how we implemented it. So as said, my name is Kundish. I'm the co-founder of an independent asset management company called Abeloo, which means bee in Esperanto, for the people who knows a little bit about this international language. The company is based in Geneva, Switzerland, and we launched the company in 2018. We started with total blank sheets and the intention to build a company following our beliefs and convictions. For legal reasons, I have to tell you, this is not a marketing presentation. You know that in the financial business, we have to comply with a lot of rules. So please consider this just as an insight document, not as a marketing or sales document. And yes, so we want to show you some insights about how an asset manager could integrate and use this technology and how to enter the carbon market. That's good. Scroll down. Here. So we like this statement from Albert Einstein, basically, who demonstrates us that all of us has a role to play in this very challenging times. So as said, the company started with a blank sheet, and the aim of the company is to define a path to carbon neutrality and to demonstrate that this path is doable for any other asset manager in the world. So, no, let's continue. So based on the statement that on the one hand, companies and governments have to reduce the carbon emissions, this is, you can see the anthropogenic CO2 emissions, inside and outside the value chain. And on the other side, on the right side of the screen, is to increase the global carbon sinks. So we defined at Abeloo, we defined a vertical inclusion process on carbon neutrality. Go down. So as you can see on the right side, we have the top-down approach, where basically we want to have a science-based emission reduction process, allowing traditional assets to lower the carbon emission of a traditional portfolio of equities and bonds invested in companies or in governments. And then what is new now is trying to monetize and securitize natural assets, such as natural-based solution, forests or reforestation project, and so on. And if we can dream a little bit, so maybe the future will be that in your asset, in your portfolio, which you could hold in a traditional bank, is having, let's say, 50% of traditional assets and 50% of natural assets, such as forest preservation projects or even biodiversity or whatever. So then, so the important thing is to try to give a value or a price on these assets, which basically means then that we are able, if you give a price, basically the people have more respect, and for us it's then possible to make a security or a fund allowing people to invest. Go down. So as some of financing sources are already existing, mainly coming from governments on the left side, and I think I saw some research that governments are financing more than 85% of such projects, and 15% only are coming from the private sector. They're using traditional private equity and debt funds, so smaller private foundation, green bonds, and so on, but not so much about carbon markets. So entering carbon market allows investors to allocate their money directly to forest preservation and reforestation projects alongside, and this is very important, alongside getting a financial return on this investment. While investors are incentivized, the attraction of such investment is helping them for sure for faster climate actions. So here basically you have an overview of the different types of carbon credits. It goes from forestry, renewable energy, energy efficiency, household devices, agriculture. Maybe you have already seen that sort of sector definition. And what we try to focus specifically in this fund, we want to prioritize on forestry and land use projects, because in our view, this is the main and the most obvious challenge we have to fight the climate change. So here just a few on the voluntary carbon markets. You see that many organizations, NGOs, are seeing the future with a rapid growing market, even on natural climate solution as well, not only on traditional carbon credits, but also on natural-based solutions. Page 9. Avant, on continue. Continue. So yes, so we Abeloo set up a bankable investment vehicle or a fund, which is the common word for a collective investment vehicle. As carbon credits for the time being are non-traditional assets, and they are not exchanged on traditional exchanges like your stock exchange and so on. And for the time being, it's not possible for traditional investors or even other investors, institutional investors, to hold it in a traditional bank account. Therefore, we built this fund with an ISIN number, which makes it then a financial vehicle and gives access to any sort of investor. Very important, we were talking, Michele and Yves were talking about ex ante and ex post, so we call it more spot and forward carbon credits in the financial language. So it was very important to include both aspects into the same product, into the same vehicle. So basically, we have here two innovations. First one, we have a bankable investment vehicle offering incentives for the investor, so a return. And secondly, this fund is able to pre-finance new projects and helping, so that the ex ante, and helping them to accelerate the process of forest preservation. So why ex ante? As said, it helps to fasten the financing process, and at the same time having a good risk assessment model, as shown before by Yves and Michele. It helps to track all the different steps, helping them to get certified. And for us as investors, it helps us as well to secure some asset best-in-class projects before they are on the market. Next slide. So here we have an overview about the portfolio, the size. So the idea is to have the illiquid side, which we call the ex ante side. It will be allocated roughly 20% of the assets. And because the investors, they want to achieve a return, and the return you can only do on liquid assets, so on existing carbon credits. So we allocate roughly 80% to that sort of assets. And the good thing is, we need to have a certain diversification as well. So on both sides, both on the illiquid and the liquid side. On the liquid side, as the fund is growing, we are able then to diversify in different projects. So if one should fail, then it will help. Maybe then not all of them will fail. And on the other side, we will generate return thanks to the spot trading or the ex post carbon credit certificates. Next page. So basically here, it's not our risk assessment process. We'll show it later on, but this is just to show what are the main points we have to check when we look at carbon credits and our projects. So basically, it needs to be real, it needs to be measurable. We were talking since beginning of the day about additionality. So additionality is one of the main important points. It should be permanent as well. It needs to avoid leakage. We need to have an ongoing monitoring and comply with social, environmental safeguards. And in addition, I would say it has to comply as well with the local population, having the livelihood to be increased and in the local population. So this is basically the total process from the left side. If you have a look on the left side where you have the project developers, project managers. So basically we need to check that the projects we want to finance, that you have three aspects which need to cover. The first one for sure is that we are on preservation and restoration project, which involves as well the human development index. This is very important. If you don't improve the livelihood of the local population, then certainly the value of your certificate will not be valued as such. And for sure, if the livelihood is increasing, for sure then the local population has a need on energy supply which is increasing, and which should not be covered with coal or with other energies. So I don't want to go through the whole process, but just to show you that at each step we have an ongoing measuring thanks to the technology of AxessImpact. So from our perspective as an asset manager, we cover the total process from A to Z. So here some real numbers about what was achieved this year in terms of pricing. These are real prices. So on nature-based global emission offsets, you see a growth since July until it was the end of August, and the same of global emission offsets. So you see that the market is going very fastly. You have maybe here a bottom effect, but certainly it will continue. Next slide. You can see that even on the retirement side, which is an important number for us, that the retirement, these are from Verma and Gold Standard, that the retirement of these carbon credits is going as well and fast growing since the beginning of this year. These are some projections about retirement and what we expect in the near future. So we have the low and high scenario, and in between, this is maybe what will be achieved in the future. So a market which is still growing in the next few years. And this is just to show you an example on two trades which were done during this summer, and you see that don't have a look on the numbers, don't consider them for the future, but it's just to give an example of what are the reality on this market. Next slide. And yes, as the web said, end of September, we don't have really time to sideline first carbon market, and with this process and with this fund, we want to achieve an acceleration of and giving more incentives to future investors or existing investors to say, okay, now it's time to enter this market, even if it's a small one, but it's an urgent question. And finally, to conclude, investors have a large appetite to nature-based solution. I think you have already noticed it. But before investing, they need to trust into this sort of new asset class by first bringing transparency, having a bankable asset, having actual and monitored valorization, real proof of impact on nature, biodiversity, and human development, traceability, as said before, and a strong governance. Then I'm completely convinced that a big step forward on nature preservation is achieved. I hope I was not too long. Thank you very much for your listening, and last part.
Thank you, Knut. Thank you. You've had perfect timing. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we don't have much more time at that point, but I invite all our attendees to get back to you during the networking session and connect with you, or otherwise directly via email or social media.